Hey, internets. This is Andrew, one of the Lost Origins co-hosts. Thank you so much for joining us this week as we jump down yet again another rabbit hole. This week's going to be super exciting, you guys. We're going to be talking with another veteran and hitter from Season 1. And if you're one of the few people who have not encountered the work of Scott Crichton in the wild, I want you to throw open a new tab right now in your browser, head over to innertraditions.com, and just search for his work. That dude has penned some of the most incredible reads that are on the market today, and he is exploring a lot of the erroneous histories that are taking place on the Giza Plateau. His most recent book is this bad boy right here, The Great Pyramid Hoax. In this book, Scott outlines the work of Colonel Vyse, and he also explains how much of that work has actually been fabricated to set Vyse up to go down in history. So, not only today are we going to be exploring the Giza Plateau with our good friend Scott Crichton, we're going to be led by this jolly Scottishman on an adventure to dig up the unknown in the past. So, why don't we nestle in and jump into Season 2, Episode 3 of Lost Origins, The Great Pyramid Hoax with Scott Crichton. Off we go.
Boom.
Holler.
Welcome to this week's episode of Lost Origins.
What's good, party people?
All right. CK, how are you, homie?
I am doing so well. It's been a beautiful week. What about you?
It's been good. Like the weather's been a little bizarre.
A little
out here
rainy.
and a little thundersome.
Our pond is 2 times the size it normally is.
Yeah,
It's invaded our backyard.
You showed me those
Yeah,
pictures.
got even worse.
We had a thunderstorm, I think it was like Sunday or Monday night, and we sleep with our windows open. And I was in that like weird little space between awake and asleep where you can like feel it happening and you're like, okay, here we go.
Is this a
it?
dream?
Right. And there was this clap of thunder that literally sounded like it was in our room. And I guess I just shot up out of bed and like, just
Someone's like, get up.
Right.
You need to do stuff.
But I just like screamed and cursed about how scared I was. And, Shay's
She's like, go back to bed. Spoon me. Everything will be fine.
Makes everything better, right?
She's like, get back in bed.
Why is there so much clapping? It's too much. All right. So before we jump into everything Scott Crichton related, let's just kind of tee things up today, right? So as always, today's show is presented and sponsored by our friends over at Inner Traditions and Barron Company. Our guest today, actually, his work is
one of their authors.
Yeah, it's published by them, and that's how I met Scott. I think it's been 4 years. I met Scott through Inner Traditions Barron Company. They made that connection for us, and so we obviously appreciate everything they do for us.
Yeah.
But
and for the community, for these
yeah.
authors, just to make sure that there's a forum, a venue for people to get a lot of this stuff out. Get books out, work on their websites, all that kind of stuff.
Right. And they make it so accessible too. It's like for the longest time, getting these kinds of theories, concepts, ideas out into, just out for public consumption was not an easy thing. And, a common theme of this show is talking about, just like the chokehold that is modern academia and how it relates to if that puzzle piece doesn't fit within the overall vision of this narrative, we kind of punt and we don't even want to go there. Yeah. And I love that they explore that space passionately.
Yep.
And it's pretty amazing. So for everybody out there, if you're not familiar with Inner Traditions, head over to innertraditions.com. Check out all the books that they offer. I mean, they have a huge catalog as it relates to ancient mysteries, but I mean, they have content and solid books.
Consciousness, on other history, on other science, alternative medicines.
Yep. There's some really
yoga.
Yoga. I mean, there's some really cool stuff on there. So we strongly recommend that you pop over there and pick something up and just get your read on, expand that brain a little bit.
Get some books.
Yeah. you're practicing.
Bring it out. Yeah, just trying to get Scottish. Have time. Some books.
Oh man. So for everybody out there who has subscribed to the show and left us a 5-star review, my God, thank you so much. You guys have no idea how important that is. The algorithm that drives podcast placement and like just the rankings and charts in general, it's a pretty gnarly rabbit hole. So if you've done that, thank you so much. If you have not and you feel compelled to help us out,
Just click that subscribe button.
there it is.
Just click it.
Click it, click it, and then write words about us with 5 stars.
And then if you don't think we're 5-star worthy, please feel free to send us a message, privately if that's possible. And just say, guys, step your game up.
Right.
I'd love to see you guys. You're at a 7. We'd like to see it at 12.
Right. Or review us on Yelp because I don't care about Yelp.
Yeah. These guys make horrible lo mein and their restaurant is ridiculous. There's a family living in their place. It's like, dude, that's my house.
Right.
Sorry.
Sorry about that.
Sorry for the wait.
So let's give a quick shout out to a Patreon subscriber that came in over the week.
So
Always
awesome.
cool. Like it's really neat to see when people hop in and support the show that way, like, being willing to invest their own dollars into what we're doing and what we're trying to explore.
And one curd of creamy goodness floated to the creamy top. And as we were talking about this, Andrew's like, this one rock star dude, this guy named Paul Klopping, apparently just, put in a monthly Patreon support of the account. And isn't that awesome? And I could not help but start laughing insofar as Paul Klopping is a good friend of mine, one of the true menches that I know. Just super amazing brain and heart. And thank you, Paul Klopping, for supporting Lost Origins. We really appreciate it.
It's so cool that like he supports the show and
out there lurking in Salt Lake City, making robots in a lab. And he was like, you know what? Those guys probably need a little monthly support.
Yeah, let's peel him a cup of coffee and let him continue to question everything. It's no big deal.
Huge.
That's
huge,
awesome.
man.
Thank
we
you,
really
homie.
Appreciate you.
We appreciate that. And we got a question from one of our listeners via Twitter this week. So we had Robert Ellis. I feel like I said that right. I don't think there's one way to pronounce Robert, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Robert Ellis.
Maybe that's it. Maybe that's it. So he hit us with which season 1 episode was the most powerful, impactful, and/or eye-opening episode for you personally?
I had that same question.
God, that's hard though. It's really tough. Like I'm literally drawing a blank, and I read this question earlier this week, and you think I would have like prepared something, but I didn't. I was too busy being terrified by thunder. They were all such good conversations, but I think my 2 favorite were Andrew Collins. Okay, like that dude's work, first of all, is so gnarly, and I love the way he looks at things and how meticulous he is with his research. But he's also just so pro, right? Like the way he communicates, the way he presents his work, the way that that he interviews even is on a whole nother level. But he's also just very down to earth and really like willing to hop in and talk to anybody about anything.
And did he blow your mind with any one particular nugget, or is it kind of one of those things where when you're as deep in the field as you are and you're as kind of just hungry to read all of the things as you are, you're kind of unflappable now and things don't actually peel your wig back?
I mean, I still fanboy pretty hard, dude.
Sure.
I really do. If I wouldn't say there's one particular nugget, but it's just his work on Göbekli Tepe in general. When he really starts to dig into animal husbandry and just like the boom of agriculture and just being able to like domesticate crops and then connecting that to the beginning of civilization, it fills all of these like holes in that narrative on a whole nother level. And I think the work is so important, and it's mind bending. And I'm really excited to have him back on the show. We've been going back and forth with him via email over the last couple of weeks, and so we're just trying to iron out some details because he has a new book coming out in September that continues this investigation into Göbekli Tepe. So I would say Andrew Collins, God, but Scott Creighton. Like, not trying to like self promote today's show, but that guy,
they're already listening.
they're already listening.
It's gonna be great though. Keep listening.
I like his. I've always just been super intrigued by ancient Egypt. Like ever since I was a kid, I remember. I think I was like 7 years old, and I wanted to become an archaeologist. That was what my dream job was. You fast forward, 30 some years or whatever, and I work in tech, and it's not the case, right? But that, like, I think it was Egypt at a very young age that dug its claws into me, and that's why I wanted to go down that path. And so the work that he does very much explores like all of the mysteries, and then just the way that like the Egyptian Antiquities Department kind of really, it's not kind of, they like literally strangle what happens on that plateau, and they control it. And if a theory doesn't align with the narrative they're trying to present, they just blackball it altogether. It's
Hmm.
crazy what happens out there. And I've had some interesting conversations with like Robert Bouval, for example,
Hmm.
about his
Yep.
feud with Zahi Hawass, and it's just crazy. But the way Scott approaches it is just, it's very real. It's very everyman, I guess, right? Like he also works in IT, and his passion is ancient Egypt, and you can feel that passion not only when you read one of his books, but like when you talk to him. And it helps that he's just like the nicest
Just the
Scottish dude.
cutest guy.
Yeah,
Oh
like
my gosh.
it's so good.
Your conversation with him in last season, it just seemed like he's so genuine and just like is amused by things,
Hmm.
but also like a pretty serious researcher.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk to him today. Before we jump into that, though, let's. I've got a couple things I want to run by you. Okay, I was thinking about this morning, and we explore a lot of mysteries on this show. One mystery that we haven't like really unpacked yet is arguably the greatest mystery of all time, CK, and that is the mystery of parenthood.
Oh my goodness, what a deep chasm of mysteries it
Yeah,
is.
it is. It's and so many butts to wipe, and
Oh man, they never tell you how much poop you're going to
yeah,
touch,
they don't
but
prep you
it's a
for that.
lot. It is more than zero.
Yeah, and if Lost Origins ends up becoming your number one source for birth control, I mean, whatever, it's fine.
Kids are the best. They're the
So
best.
check this out, okay? Why I'm bringing that up is I experienced a scenario with my daughter last weekend that was the most Kevin McAllister nonsense that I've ever encountered in my life. Yeah. So my dad for the last 3 years has like really been harping on me to, he lives in Denver, and he's really been harping on me to let her fly out there by herself and
Yep.
spend a week with grandma and grandpa. And I'm just not comfortable with it, and it's been this whole
I
thing.
showed
And
that photo from Facebook to Jasmine, my wife, and she was like, "Whoa, she is so small to be traveling on planes by
right,
herself."
right. Well, I mean, she's also a
She,
Tucson, right? Like we don't get very
sure.
tall. So um,
She's a very mature, like very classy young
I
person.
appreciate that. And I know she would too. So we go to Omaha to get her on the plane. I finally cave and I agree to it, right? And I'm like, all right, dad, it's fine. We'll make it happen. So we booked the flight, Omaha to Denver, one way. And they have the unaccompanied minor policy, which
Yep.
states that
Get a
there's a
badge.
there's a badge, and there's a flight attendant that's legally tethered to her the entire time, cannot leave her side. Like it's the law. And she gets on her plane, and me and the boys, watch the plane take off. And before she leaves, I say, "Listen, like, I'm proud of you. This is a big step. I'm excited that you're able to go on this journey. I hope you have an amazing trip. Text me the second you land, so I know you're okay." Right? So about an hour and a half goes by, nothing. I call her
And
straight to
that's a
voicemail.
47-minute flight.
Yeah, it's quick. So it goes to voicemail, and then a little bit of time go by. I'm like, "Oh, maybe they, I don't know, maybe
You're
I
not
don't know.
gonna like freak out or
Yeah, right, it's
anything.
fine." So I text her, and a little bit more time goes by, and she calls me, and I'm like, "Hey, how was your flight?" "Oh, it was fun. It was good. I did these things. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm in Salt Lake City."
Oh no, poor buddy.
And I'm like,
Oh no.
"That's not Denver."
Oh.
And I don't know, her 11-year-old mind, if she's made the connection of, how far off the mark Salt Lake City is from
Whoa.
Denver. So I'm like, "What happened?" And she said, "Well, apparently there was some weather, and then we ran out of gas." And so
Whoa.
we had to stop in Salt Lake City for gas, and now we're just getting ready to take off again. And so I'm heading to Denver now. And I talked to my dad, and we're all on the same page. And I guess the airport like didn't have as much fuel as they should, so there was a delay there. And then I guess there was like 6 tornadoes just hanging out around DIA, just like stopping her from coming altogether. So what should have been a hour long flight, nonstop from Omaha to Denver ended up taking her, kind of all over the Midwest
A nice
and
little tour,
nice
whatever, a
little
little
tour.
vacation.
Yeah, it was fine. And it was an 8-hour trip for her.
Whoa. That is gnarly.
Yeah. So, like I said, most Kevin McAllister scenario I've ever experienced. And, when as a parent, it's terrifying enough to send her into, the airplane that is the Twinkie, the fart Twinkie with wings or whatever.
Mhm.
And then you find out my kid is somewhere I don't
Still
know, can't control,
pretty
whatever.
crazy that we live in a time where she can just jump on the cell phone and give you a call.
True.
I
True.
feel like when I was an unaccompanied minor way back in the day, it's weird that they even had planes back then, but like, I would get off the plane and then not talk to my parents for like days.
Yeah.
And then you like find a landline and give them a call, hope they're around.
Mail them a
Yeah,
postcard.
mail them a snail mail letter. Hey, doing fine here at camp. I'll talk to you in a few weeks.
Also, I drew this brontosaurus for you.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It eats stuff. Yeah.
So that was my week.
That is incredible. And couldn't have happened to a nicer young person. But just prepare her for future travel. Things sometimes don't happen properly, right?
Exactly.
And it's how you roll with it.
Good life lesson. And so,
Yeah,
I think that kind of tees us up for a nice segue to have a quick conversation with Eden.
indeed.
All right.
What's Eden thinking about?
All right, welcome to this week's installment of Ask a Sixth Grader with Eden. Eden, what's up? How are you?
Good.
You're doing good?
Yeah.
So let's give people who are listening a little bit more about you, right? So you have some pets. Do you have
I have
pets?
a lot of pets. I have 6 animals. At my dad's house, I have 2 hamsters, and my hamsters' names are Bruce and Gold. And I'm pretty sure you guys know that Gold is a girl and then Bruce is a boy because Gold's a girl name and Bruce is a boy name. And then at my mom's house, I have 2 dogs and 2 cats. My cats' name are Saki and Sushi, and they're both girls. And then my dogs' names are Lulu and Daphne, and they're both girls.
So a lot of animals, huh?
Yeah.
It's pretty awesome. So you want to talk about history real quick?
Yeah.
Okay. So who discovered America?
I know this, but I don't remember.
Like, what did you learn in school this year?
Well, we didn't really learn who discovered America. We learned who discovered Africa, I think is what it was called.
Do you know the name Christopher Columbus?
Yes, that's who we learned about.
Yeah, so he came from Spain.
And then he traveled across the sea.
Mm-hmm. He had his 3 ships.
And 2 of them sunk.
Yeah?
And then he discovered Africa or something like that.
America.
America.
North America.
Yeah, but people don't think that he discovered it because the Native Americans were actually there first before him, and he actually kidnapped 2 kids and brought them back to America.
Do you know? So yes, the Native Americans were definitely here first. Do you know what year he supposedly discovered America in?
1848.
1492.
Oh.
So that's when everybody thinks that the New World was discovered. But there's a lot of evidence all over North America that says otherwise. So we had somebody on our show recently his name is Scott Walter. Do you know that name?
No.
No, you never heard of Scott Walter?
Mm-mm.
So he's a forensic geologist, and he does all this work analyzing different sites across the world and being able to date them and figure out, how old are they, where they come from, and kind of trace them back to their source. And he has evidence that shows that the Vikings and the Templars and all these ancient peoples from the old world, like Europe and whatnot, were here in America way before Columbus. What do you think about that?
Well, the only reason I think Columbus went across the sea was to prove to the king that he was a great man. And then when he got back, he got all this attention.
Yeah.
He just wanted attention because I don't know why, but I mean, he should have told them that the Native Americans were there first, and then he would have been giving them the truth. But instead, he said oh, I found these random kids just wandering around.
He did it all for the glory, huh?
Yeah, he did it for money, and the king said I'll give you billions of dollars if you do this or something. And he did, and he still got that money, and I don't think he should
So,
have.
do you think that it's possible that there's other people that could have been in America from Europe before Columbus? Do you think that's a possibility?
Yeah, like Vikings.
Like the Vikings? Because when people think of people from the our ancient past, not a lot of people think that they could travel the oceans and they had the technology or sophistication to be able to
Mhm.
know where they were when they were out in the middle of the ocean, right? But you think it's possible?
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for coming on the show this week, Eden.
Yeah.
Did you have fun?
Yeah.
Nice.
I'm gonna go pet Bruce.
Go pet Bruce.
Okay.
Someone that young should not know about that stuff.
I mean, she knows a lot of things, man. And I just love her like honesty and her take on stuff. It's so cool to see the way she perceives the world.
Sure.
I love it.
Yeah,
I
it's so
absolutely
genuine.
love it. So I know that we've been getting a lot of messages and interaction on social media and whatnot that people dig that segment, and I shared that with her and she was so pumped. And her first question was, well, has anybody submitted any questions for me to answer?
Oh,
So
nice. I like it. I like where her head's at.
yeah,
People should submit questions for her to answer.
yeah. Let's get Eden some questions, right? So if you have questions for Eden, just fire away on social media, and we'll make that happen.
That's huge.
So today's show, dude, let's talk about this. We have Scott Crichton
Scott Creighton.
coming back on the show. I'm so stoked for you to meet this guy and talk to him, man. Like, you're gonna love the exchange. You're gonna love picking his brain. Just a great dude. And for our listeners who maybe aren't super familiar with his work, I mean, his resume is super solid. He's been like just voraciously researching ancient Egypt since like 2005, 2006, I believe, from a being published standpoint. And he's very well respected in the space. He's had like some exchanges with Graham Hancock and had some of his work published on Graham's site.
He's regularly featured on Graham's
yeah,
site.
yeah, he is. And he has 3 books to date. The first one was the Giza Prophecy. The second one was the Secret Chamber of Osiris, which was the focus of our last conversation when he was on the show before.
Yep.
And then his most recent book is the Great Pyramid Hoax, which has a dynamite forward by our homie Laird Scranton. And that guy can write. Man, can he write? And so it's just really neat to see the progression of his work and just like how accepted it is and just people being super supportive of it and continuing to like push him to continue to investigate what's happening at Giza, right? So it's I'm really excited for the conversation. I think this week's challenge, last week with Scott Walter, our challenge was to
see if you could get him or to tell him that he's got to come to Nebraska and have a beer.
Exactly.
You worked that in.
Yeah,
That's
we
nice.
were able to pull that off. So I think this week we should do an accent challenge with this guy, right?
Oh,
like
man.
maybe you and I hit him with some sentence in our best Scottish accent. I'll do my best not to go Irish. You got to do your best not to go Jamaican.
Oh, it's so seriously hard.
It's gonna be whoa, that was Jamaican and Scottish at the same
Hey,
time.
lad, it's crazy down here in the islands.
Dude, you've got 7 minutes to pull yourself together. And then maybe he hits us with his best American accent.
Oh yeah, like, guys, how are things going? And I forget how accentless we are here in the Midwest too.
But I think to the rest of the world, it's not the case. Right?
It's like to the rest of the world though, when they think of an American accent, they think of like that Southern drawl, or they think of the people in California just talking about the waves.
Yeah, bro.
Yeah, but they I think often overlook the completely vanilla middle of the country flyover accent.
Yeah. Well, what do you think, dude? Let's
let's
we get him on the horn?
into it. Let's do it.
All right, let's do it. All right, Scott Crichton, how are you, man?
I'm good, Andrew. How are you? Long time no speak.
I know it's been a while. It's good to hear your voice. I've been, keeping up with you online and just following your work, and it's really amazing what you've put together with this new book. And we'll talk about that today for sure. But just thank you so much for carving out time for us to come back on the show, and I'm excited to introduce you to CK as well.
Hey, Scott, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good, CK. Nice to speak to you.
Such a pleasure to speak to you as well. I was really impressed with the awesome conversation you guys had last season, and I'm excited to join you guys.
It was a good one.
Yeah.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. I can't remember it that much. It was a while ago, but I'm glad you enjoyed it.
That was the day drinking that did that though, right? So Scott, let's kind of do a 35,000-foot overview. You've been on the show before. There's several people that have listened to that episode. But for those maybe who have not listened to that episode, or maybe who haven't organically encountered your work and your research, just kind of hit us with a little bit of your background. What the focus of your research has been over the last several years. Just kind of catch us up to speed real quick.
Okay. Well, I have been interested in, as you probably know, my latest book is called The Great Pyramid Hoax.
Yep.
And that book, it's obviously about ancient Egypt, the pyramids at Giza, and the wider pyramids as well. But I've always been interested in ancient Egyptian history. And ever since I was a small child. And you know how you go through school and such like, and you're taught in junior school, and you go to secondary or high school, that the pyramids were the tombs of the pharaohs. Well, I was always intrigued by this idea because I remember seeing a photograph when I must have been about 7 or 8 in junior school, or what we call primary school here in Scotland. And it was a picture of the Great Pyramid. Now, it wasn't a drawing, it was an actual picture of the Great Pyramid. And you could see the stones and the size of these stones. And a person was standing beside these stones. And the stone was bigger than the person. And I'm going like, my goodness, these things are absolutely humongous. These are enormous. You know, people like my friends and that, they were kind of interested in dinosaurs and the velociraptors and all that kind of stuff, but
Sure.
because they were big and nasty and horrible, you know. But I was fascinated by the pyramids. I was fascinated by the shapes, by the sheer size of these things, and why would the people of Egypt have built this incredible monument for just one guy?
Just one dude.
Yeah, one dude. Yeah. What's that all about? You know, so it fascinated me. And then, you know, as you get older, you learn more. And, you know, so when I left school, I kind of got interested in it myself in sort of the late 70s, early 80s, you know, reading various books on the subject, Robert Bauval, guys like that, and learning more about, you know, even orthodox books as well, and just basically trying to figure out what these really were all about, because I just could not get it into my head that they could do this thing for one dude. Yeah. So, and then you learn all these facts that you weren't taught at primary school and secondary school, that, well, they've never actually found any pharaohs' bodies in any of these structures, you know? So that was like a big wow moment for me. And so I wanted to know more. Well, if they hadn't found the pharaoh's body in them, well, what did they find in them? Just what are these structures really all about? Were they really the tombs of the pharaohs? So I did a whole bunch of research into the whole question since probably about 2005, 2004, something like that. About 15 years I've been researching this.
Right.
This whole topic. You know, in between working, I'm an IT engineer. That's my kind of day job. But I'm a freelancer contractor, so I can come and go as I please, which is kind of cool. And with my previous jobs in the past, I was allowed to. I was working all over the world, so that was great. That allowed me to travel and see of ancient monuments all over the world. So that was really fantastic. But you know, I always came back to this question, you know, about the pyramids. I just could not get it out of my system, so to speak. I just had to get the answers that suited me, that rang true to me, rather than just an answer that was the consensus opinion of academia. which I just couldn't subscribe to, really. And I know other Egyptologists have problems even accepting the mainstream paradigm. So that's basically what I've been doing for the last 15 years now, is trying to get to the truth of what these structures were really all about. And my latest book, The Great Pyramid Hoax, it kind of takes me in a kind of different direction, Andrew, from my previous work. My previous work was more about trying to explain really what these structures were about, or really about. Whereas the Great Pyramid Hoax, it kind of takes us to a rather murky and little-known corner of world history. You know, it's one that's rarely ever really discussed by historians. But, you know, it's one that, you know, it's nevertheless, it's had a profound impact on our understanding of these monuments. And because, just to put you slightly in the picture, in 1837, a crime was committed inside the Great Pyramid. Now, I'm not talking here, guys, about some plundered treasure or anything like that, okay? The crime I'm talking about here is one that quite literally, and I mean this quite sincerely, guys, it quite literally changed the course of world history. And this is what I've been investigating, this crime. Now, my book, The Great Pyramid Hoax, explores the nature of this crime, who perpetrated it, and why they did it. Okay.
So Scott, just taking a moment there, can you catch us up on who exactly is Colonel Howard Vyse?
Okay, Colonel Vyse is a he was born in the late 1700s. He was a colonel in the British Army. He was a member of the British ruling classes. He was a very, very wealthy man, this guy. Okay, so he'd like these vast country estates, you know, all over England. You know, so this guy wasn't short of a penny or two. Okay, he was very, very wealthy, and he was also a member of the British Parliament twice. And there's actually a good story which I relate in the book about him becoming a member of Parliament, whereby he actually committed serious electoral fraud.
He bribed his way into that.
Yeah, that's
that
how
case, right?
that's how these things are done, right?
Even today.
You can leave it up to the chance of democracy or just get it done,
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
You know, so this guy basically used his wealth to buy his way into the British Parliament, and the evidence for that is pretty well documented. And I suspect he may have done it twice in his second term in Parliament, but that story is a bit more difficult to find the evidence to prove. But the first time he became a member of Parliament, he basically bribed his way into Parliament, and then he lied about it as well, because he was challenged at the time by one of his competitors in the election of 1807. And this guy basically accused Vyse of cheating. And Parliament investigated it. He asked Vyse basically, or they would have asked Vyse, did you cheat? Did you bribe your way? Did you buy votes? And Vyse would have had to have said, no, I didn't. Which is a lie, because we now know, we've got the evidence which proves he did. So he lied to Parliament as well. You know, so we're not talking about, you know, a squeaky clean guy here. This guy basically did what he needed to do to get a job done.
Mm-hmm. And he had a track record for it.
Yeah, he's got form, what we call here in the UK. He's got form. He's got previous. Yeah.
Sure.
So that's the kind of character that we're dealing with here. Now, he was also a bit of an antiquarian. He from what we understand of him, he preferred the studying ancient artifacts to being in the military. You know, so he went to Egypt in 1836. Basically, a lot of aristocrats back in the early 19th century. That's the kind of thing they did. They went to see the Holy Land and so forth and so on, and spent, you know, some of their wealth doing this. But Colonel Vyse, he stops off by Giza, goes to Cairo and Giza, and he spends a lot of his wealth investigating the pyramids. Now, he tells us in he published a book 3 years later after his time at Giza. He published a book based on his field notes. He wrote these field notes during his 2 years in Egypt. And he published several volumes of his book called Operations at Giza. It was 3 volumes. And these books basically describe everything essentially that happened to him during his time investigating the pyramids at Giza. And they're actually quite an interesting read in a lot of ways. But one of the things that you find is some of the things he's written in that book, they just do not bear the truth of what actually happened when he was really there in 1837.
Well, he kind of shapes the narrative to play into his actual agenda, right? Like, and correct me if I'm wrong, Scott, but when he went into Egypt, he was actually a part of a team with, I think, like 2 other dudes that, were on a similar level as him. And over the course of their time in Egypt, they end up like pushing one of them out and then claiming the discoveries that guy made as their own. I mean, is that correct? That kind of timeline there, and just the way he would handle that.
Yeah, well, he actually went to Egypt more or less on his own. Well, not strictly speaking on his own. He would take. I think he took an artist with him, because back in 1837 they didn't actually have like photography or anything like that.
Sure.
So these wealthy aristocrats, they would take a professional artist with them so that they could draw pictures or engravings for their book when they eventually published their book. But he met some people while he was at Giza, and he became involved with, or he met up with a chap called Colonel Campbell, who I believe was the British consul in Cairo at the time, and who was essentially Vyse's boss, if you like, in Egypt. And they started working together. They got a team of guys together, and they put in some money together to fund this exploration of the Great Pyramid. But he didn't take anyone with him from the UK. He kind of met most of his crew there on the ground at Giza while he was there.
And so he was like super motivated too by like making the big discovery, right? When he's like looking at Giza, he's looking at that plateau. I mean, he's all about trying to find a sarcophagus, a cartouche, something that like can almost be his legacy, correct?
That's exactly it, Andrew. That's exactly what he was trying to do. In fact, he even tells us in his published book that he wanted to make a great discovery, an important discovery. He even tells us what it is he wanted to find, and that was the sarcophagus of Khufu, because it seems, well, as you probably know, when the Great Pyramid was breached in, I think it was 1820, something like that, by Al-Mahmud, they found nothing inside the sarcophagus, or the granite box, there was nothing there. So Vyse probably believed that this was perhaps a decoy burial chamber, a decoy sarcophagus, and he hoped to find Khufu's true burial place, and that would have been the discovery of all history, and obviously all his attendant treasure and so forth and so on. So this was Vyse's great ambition, and he speaks about this in his book, and he says several times that he wanted to find and make an important discovery, and this guy was driven. He was deeply deeply motivated to because at this time, you have to understand as well, guys, just to kind of put a bit of context around this period of history. You had the Germans digging expeditions at Giza, you had the French, you had the Italians. So there was all this national prestige involved also. So this, I believe, was probably also a motivator for Vyse to this one-upmanship, to bigger, better discovery than all the other exploration teams had done from these other countries. He wanted to find the best and the biggest, most important discovery of all.
Right. So he's in Giza, and he's trying to figure out, where Khufu's buried. And at the time, I believe that none of the hidden chambers had been exposed yet, right? Like to date, I think there's 5 in the Giza pyramid, in the big pyramid, that have been uncovered. And Vyse, so like he's responsible for opening 4 of those,
That's right.
somewhat destructively as well, right?
Absolutely.
to put it lightly.
Yeah, they wouldn't get away with that nowadays. Absolutely not.
Right.
What there's actually 5 chambers, what are called the stress relieving chambers above the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid. Egyptologists say that these chambers were there to relieve the pressure on the roof of the King's Chamber.
They say a lot of things, though, Scott. So
yeah, they do. I mean, they do. But I just don't buy it, because if you look at the Queen's Chamber, the gabled slabs are directly over the chamber. They're not elevated like you find in the King's Chamber. And the Queen's Chamber is lower in the structure of the Great Pyramid. So it's got even more pressure bearing down on it with all that extra stonework. So I just don't buy that particular mainstream explanation. But anyway, that aside, there was one of these chambers, the lowest of these stress relieving chambers, that had always been open since the pyramid was built, but no one had ever discovered it until a dude called Nathaniel Davidson in 1767, something like that, discovered this chamber, the lowest of the 5 of these chambers, and this one was open. Now, if you're familiar with the architecture, the interior of the Great Pyramid, at the top end of the Grand Gallery, this is a 100-foot long sloping gallery. At the top end of that, and if you look up to the roof of the Grand Gallery at the top end, there's a small hole in the wall in the top corner above your head.
Right.
And if you get a ladder, you need about a 25-foot ladder. And Davidson only realized this hole was there because he saw a bat flying out of it. So that's what gave it away for him. So he got a ladder and he climbed up and crawled through this tiny gap. And he found himself in this, well, for want of better expression, apartment or chamber. And these chambers are about 16 feet wide by about 32 feet long, but they're only about 3 feet high. So you can only crawl through them on your hands and knees. You can't walk through these chambers, okay? So Davison found the first one, and it's been named after him. It's called Davison's Chamber. And he never realized that there was another 4 above his head, because there's absolutely no sign of any other chamber there or entry to any other of these 4 chambers above. Now, it was only realized that there may be another chamber above obviously they didn't have GPR or anything like that back in 1837.
Right.
What happened was there was a chap called Giovanni Caviglia, an Italian explorer. He'd been in Egypt for a long, long time, decades before Colonel Vyse ever came along. And he was well respected and well renowned in Egypt at the time for his work and his discoveries. He used Davison's chamber as his living quarters while he was in the Great Pyramid doing some exploratory work. He used this Davison's chamber as his living quarters. And one night, he had a long stem of a reed or grass, a long stem of grass. And between the two granite blocks of the roof of this chamber, where these blocks met, he managed to insert this reed. And it just kept going and going and going and going and went all the way through. And they realized then that there must be another chamber above this one. But again, there was no way, there was no visible entrance anywhere to this other chamber. And the story goes that Caviglia, when Vyse and Colonel Campbell and Caviglia made this business enterprise, for want of a better expression, to explore the inside of the Great Pyramid, Caviglia explained this discovery apparently to Colonel Vyse and showed him that there may be another chamber above here. Shortly after he told Vyse this, Vyse, for some reason, seems to have manufactured a grievance against Caviglia and got him kicked off the site. And Colonel Vyse then got some barrels of gunpowder, black powder, and he started blasting his way through the pyramid to find an entrance above Davison's chamber to get into this other chamber. So that's the basics of how it all started, really, for Colonel Vyse.
That's so crazy. Just thinking about going into such a sacred site with barrels of gunpowder like that just shows how different the approach maybe was to a lot of this archaeological work in the past.
To live in it too.
Yeah, the guy living in Davidson's chamber. Like, that's actually kind of cool. Yeah. So wondering then, just to keep moving, along this pathway of Vyse's discoveries, can you break it down for us a little bit about what sort of markings did Vyse then discover?
Okay, now this is the interesting thing, guys. Okay, when he broke into the first chamber using his gunpowder archaeology, he named this chamber Wellington's Chamber after the British Admiral or Duke of Wellington. Okay, he named all these chambers after military people because he was a military man or a military man. And he didn't actually notice anything in the first chamber. Only on his second visit the same day, I think initially there may have been some dust in the chamber. He let it settle and then he went back later that day. And on his way out, he found some painted marks on the east wall of Wellington's chamber. And these were just crude marks. Now, guys, we're not talking about, monumental, perfectly chiseled hieroglyphics here. We're not talking about that at all, okay? We're talking about, rough painted graffiti, basically. It's just painted onto these limestone blocks.
Sure. So it's not like high relief, low relief carvings you're seeing at like Dendera or anything, right?
No, not at all. This is graffiti. What the Egyptologists tell us, or they believe, is that this graffiti, when the stones were being quarried at the quarries, would have been dug out of the quarries, the gangs, the work crews that dug these massive stones. I mean, these stones must weigh about 30, 40 tons, some of them, okay? But when they're digging these out of the quarries, these guys, they took a great deal of pride in their work, and they would put, each crew had their own individual name, okay? And these names would often include the name of the reigning king or the reigning pharaoh, okay? And they would stamp their name onto each of these blocks, kind of as their mark. They took great pride, so they would stamp their work. They took pride in their work, and they would stamp their name on their work.
Sure.
And that would then get taken away to the pyramid. And this is how we find, because we only find these marks really inside these chambers. There's been some of them found in stones outside these chambers, but they're very, very few and far between. But inside these chambers, they're everywhere, more or less, okay? And as I said, they're just crudely painted graffiti, what they're called quarry marks from these crews that dug the stones from the quarries. So don't get this idea that they're perfectly chiseled hieroglyphics. They're not. Now, the other thing you have to understand as well is that there's a difference between painted marks and hieroglyphic marks. The hieroglyphics generally are all chiseled, yeah? But hieroglyphic chiseled marks can be read from the right or the left, okay? Whereas painted hieroglyphics can only be read from the right. When they're painted or written with ink and pen, you always read them from the right, no matter what. But when they're chiseled in monumental architecture, they can be read from the left or the right, okay? So you have to understand there's a distinction there as well. So when they're painted, you always read them from the right. When they're chiseled, read from the right or left. Okay, so Vyse found these marks in this chamber. That's what he says. He found them on the day he entered that chamber. He writes in his diary. Now, the first anomaly I noticed when I was reading his published account is he just says he found the quarry marks. That's all he says. Now, he asked one of his assistants, a dude called Mr. Hill. He asked Mr. Hill to make one-to-one facsimile copies of the marks, all the marks in all the chambers which Colonel Vyse blasted his way into, which he could then send back to the British Museum. So Mr. Hill did this. Now, when you look at Mr. Hill's drawings, which I did a couple of years back at the British Museum, you actually find in the drawings of Wellington's chamber, these quarry marks which he copied from that chamber, you find a partial cartouche. Now, it's very obviously a cartouche. A cartouche, just so your listeners can understand, Andrew, is the name of the king, okay? In a very distinctive oval shape. It's very, very distinctive. And Vyse, we know from reading his books, he knew what a cartouche was and the importance of a cartouche. He absolutely knew this. That's not in doubt. And yet, in his published account, all he writes is, we found the quarry marks. There's no, oh my God, look what we have found. We found the name of the builder of the pyramid. You know, think about it like this, guys. Failing to find the actual sarcophagus of the king, failing to do that, the next best thing is to find the dude's name, okay, in those chambers. Because Egyptologists, historians have for millennia been trying to find hard proof that Khufu built this monument. And here it was. And Vyse says nothing. He says zilch, nada, okay? In his published book, all he says is he found the quarry marks. Now, I thought that was strange. So for other reasons, I went to look for his actual handwritten field notes, his actual notes from the time in 1837. And I managed to find them in a little library in North London. I managed to track down his actual field notes. And when I went to incidentally, guys, you want to see this guy's writing, okay? I kid you not. You know how, like, your doctor, if he writes you what we call here a prescription,
Sure.
he prescribes some medicine for you, you can never read a doctor's handwriting. I don't know what it's like in the States, but that's what it's like over here. It's impossible to read a doctor's handwriting. This guy was worse, okay? He was worse. It's honestly, it's taken me literally years to become proficient in reading this guy's handwriting. I've given this guy's pages to writing experts. Weren't able to read anything of it. Some of them could, read some of it, but most of them just said, no, this is too much. They just gave up. But I've managed to become fairly proficient in reading this guy's writing. And what he says in his private handwritten notes, remember, this is him. At the end of the day, this is his personal thoughts. At the end of the day, what happened that day? He's in the zone. He's in the moment. Okay? And what he writes is, there were some marks that looked like quarry marks of red paint near to the figure of a bird, but there was nothing like hieroglyphics. Now, when Vyse talks about hieroglyphics, he means, what we would think as hieroglyphics, signs that you would be familiar with. Whether they're chiseled or painted, Vyse just called them all hieroglyphics, okay? He didn't know any different. Nobody did at that time. So he just says this, he found these marks near to the figure of a bird. That's the east wall of the chamber. He found marks that looked like quarry marks. And when you look at these marks, they don't actually look like hieroglyphics, these marks that he found on the east wall of the chamber. And he mentions nothing about the cartouche that Mr. Hill drew. Mr. Hill drew these marks, but he also drew a cartouche, or copied a cartouche. Vyse says nothing in his private notes of a cartouche being found in Wellington's chamber. Guys, this is his eureka moment. This guy goes on to spend something in the order, in today's terms, monetary terms, $1.3 million in his research. And
so can I hop in and ask a quick question, Scott?
Yep.
So in his handwritten field notes, is it just like, the day of the discovery, the week of the discovery, that he's not making any mention to the cartouche? Or is it like within the entire body of work, he's not mentioning it at all?
He's written his journal, as a diary, day by day, blow by blow.
Sure.
He even talks about going into chambers in the morning and then going into them again in the evening.
Right.
He's that detailed in his private notes.
Because I'm just trying to think through like the devil's advocate standpoint of like, well, maybe in that log or that entry, he hadn't seen the cartouche yet. Maybe he'd only seen the quarry marks at that point. But if it's like the entire body of work, he's not mentioning them at all. I mean, that almost feels like a completely different scenario to me.
Yeah. Well, he calls all these marks hieroglyphics or quarry marks. The terms are interchangeable. Okay. So they're completely interchangeable. So when he says, in his published account, he says he found the quarry marks, but he knows what a cartouche is. He knows what a cartouche is. And remember as well, guys, this is, he's right. This is his published book, which was published in 1840, 3 years later. So he's had time to realize all this and what he has actually found, but he still doesn't say it, which is bizarre. So that was one of the first things I felt, nah, there's something wrong here. Then we go up to the next chamber. Okay, this is Nelson's chamber, which was named after Admiral Nelson, another British military figure. Again, Vyse tells us in his published account that he found the marks on the west wall of this chamber, painted marks, quarry marks on the west wall of this chamber on the first day he entered the chamber, because they wouldn't be difficult to find, these marks, because you're literally looking at the wall. There's nothing else in the chambers, okay? It's just an empty void, an empty space. So they're examining the walls, they're measuring, they're making measurements, so they can see these marks pretty much right away, especially given the chamber below Wellington's chamber, he found marks in there. So he's anticipating there may be marks in the next chamber. So he finds marks on the first day when he goes into Nelson's chamber in his published account, except when you read the private account, when you read his private notes, he actually found them. Well, he doesn't even say he found the marks just appear. He doesn't actually even say he found the marks in this chamber, but it's the third day, not the first. So I'm asking myself, well, why is he saying in his published account that he found it the first day when it's actually the third day? Is this because he needs time to get these marks painted into these chambers? So why not just be straight? Why not just tell us what you've put in your journal? Why are you changing the dates? Why are you saying this, that? Now, the really interesting thing is the next chamber. This is Lady Arbuthnot's chamber. She was the wife of another military figure, British military figure. And once again, he opens this chamber. He goes in. Now, this chamber, guys, this chamber has quarry marks everywhere, okay? They're on every wall. They're huge. They're big. They're numerous. There's probably at least 120 hieroglyphic signs, painted signs
Oh, wow.
in this, okay? Every wall, okay? And in his published account, he mentions nothing. On the day he went into it with another guy, there was two dudes went into this paper, and they never saw a thing until 3 days later. Now, I've asked umpteen, this question umpteen times to mainstream believers in these marks that believe these marks are genuine. Can you explain that to me? And not one of them has given me a plausible explanation as to how two guys going with previous experience of the chambers below, of discovering marks in those chambers, could completely miss all the marks in this. It's got the most marks of all these chambers. In fact, this chamber has more marks than all the other chambers put together, okay? They're everywhere. And these guys, they're anticipating finding marks, for goodness sake, from the chambers below. They're totally anticipating it. And yet, Vyse says nothing.
And so, Scott, can we pull at this thread a little bit further? As I understand it, Vyse is essentially responsible for uncovering 4 of the 5 chambers that we've seen so far. And as we think about the kind of synoptic issues that we're having with the markings in the public journal versus the markings written about in the private journal, and those, the kind of lag time there, is there anything that concerns you or anything in your research that's been, kind of pushed you one way or direction to say that they found these 4 markings in the chamber, they found markings in the 4 chambers that he discovered, but in the 5th chamber, they seem to be remarkably absent.
Right.
Does that match your understanding of the situation? And has that shown up in your research at all as an odd incongruity?
Well, what you tend to find actually, guys, is when you look across the 4 chambers that he opened up, the chambers with the fewest marks, we're talking about his private journal here, not his published one. In his private journal, the chamber with the fewest marks, he finds them immediately on the same day. But as the marks increase, the time that it takes to find the marks increases, which is the complete opposite of what you might expect. If there's fewer marks in a chamber, that might take longer to find because there's only a few marks, so you might miss them. So that might take you longer. But when there's more marks, surely you're going to find them quicker. Yeah. But we find the complete opposite is the case with Vyse. When there's fewer marks, he takes longer. He finds them quicker. He finds them quicker. But when there's many, many more marks, it takes him longer to find them. Now, that just makes no sense to me at all.
And these should stand out, right? Like, I mean, we're looking at a picture of Khufu's cartouche right now, and I mean, it's pretty obvious what it is. When you compare that against the graffiti that's there, like it should be a night and day difference, right, Scott?
How do you mean, Andrew?
Like it should be pretty obvious to be able to spot one of these Khufu cartouches on the wall in these chambers.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. What a ones in Lady Arbuthnot's chamber, there are 7 full or partial cartouches in that chamber of Khufu. There's 7 of them. And Vyse, in his published book, nada, nothing. This is his moment of glory, guys. And he says nothing in it on his published account on the first day he went into that chamber with Mr. Raven. Neither of these guys saw any of these marks, any of these 7 cartouches. That makes no sense.
Yeah, it's very bizarre indeed. I mean, it's just there's a lot of things that don't line up, a lot of inconsistencies, and it's pretty bizarre all across the board. I do want to dig in a little bit more into these chambers and kind of get your take on them, Scott. We do got to take a quick break, so let's unpack that once we hop back on, and we can go from there. So more from Scott Crichton after the break. All right, welcome back.
And we're back.
We are back to our conversation with Scott Crichton, one of my straight up favorite human beings. This dude's work is just fascinating through and through. And for the first half of the show, we've just been chewing up Colonel Vyse and what his work entailed and his quote unquote discoveries within the Great Pyramid, within these chambers that he uncovered. And Scott, just fascinating stuff that you're dropping on us today. I do kind of want to pivot the conversation just a little bit. I want to get your take on these chambers, right? Every one of these chambers that Vyse discovered or that this team has discovered is empty. So I know there's a ton of competing theories out there as to just what the pyramid was intended, what purpose it was intended to serve. But what's your take on these chambers? What were their purpose? What theory resonates the most with you?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a really good question.
I try to tee you up, man. I'm just trying to tee you up.
Well, it probably kind of goes back to my fundamental belief of what these structures were all about. The purpose, the true purpose of them, explains why these chambers are there. As you know, Andrew, we've discussed this before. I believe that these pyramids now, not just the Great Pyramid, but all the pyramids, or the first 16 or so pyramids built in Egypt, the giant pyramids, were essentially built as a sort of national project to ensure the rebirth of the kingdom after a natural disaster. The ancient Egyptians believed that their kingdom was going to come to an end in a massive deluge. And King Saur had said, okay, we're going to build all these pyramids and we're going to place inside these pyramids everything that we will need to ensure the rebirth of our kingdom after the deluge has passed.
And Scott, you've described the pyramids in this instance as an arc, right?
Well, essentially, yes. That's right, CK. But it's not such a fantastic or crazy idea. This is what the ancient Egyptian writers tell us themselves. This is what they're saying these were for. And if you think about it, our civilization today is doing something almost identical.
Right.
If you think of the Svalbard global seed vault up in the Arctic Circle, if you compare there's 3 chambers in that with big long tunnels leading to those chambers from a single tunnel that branches off to these 3 tunnels, you're almost describing the interior of the Great Pyramid.
And it's so crazy that, with all the incredible engineering and logistics that we put into Svalbard, and being able to do this with the Norwegians, who are known for their precision, that in the last couple months they've had all of these issues with wetness associated with all the permafrost melting.
Yeah, that's right. So this is what I believe the pyramids were for. I think this is maybe where the story of Joseph has become confused and conflated with the pyramids as arks and granaries. No, yeah, they put a lot of grain inside the pyramids and a whole lot of other things, tools, weapons, knowledge, everything they would need inside these pyramids. Joseph probably built granaries, but somehow, because a lot of grain and a lot of other seeds would have been stored in the pyramids, these stories became conflated and confused over the years. So, just to clarify that, I'm not saying that these are Joseph's granaries. That's a separate matter altogether.
Sure.
So anyway, these they would put all these chambers inside the pyramids for the storage of all these items and various other things. And if you imagine that the Grand Gallery is a massive storage area, and you bring the roof of the King's Chamber right down over the chamber, rather than, as you know, it's currently elevated way above the chamber because of these vice chambers, these relieving chambers, these 5 relieving chambers. The roof is much, much elevated above the Grand Gallery. I think that was probably done because the roof of these chambers, the gable blocks at the very top, are incredibly heavy, probably about 70-ton blocks, maybe heavier. Now, one of these blocks if these blocks are right over the King's Chamber, there's a good chance that these could have slid and breached the Grand Gallery, potentially destroying much of what was stored in that chamber, because it was a hermetically sealed chamber. So if you've got these blocks sitting directly over the King's Chamber, they're too near to the Grand Gallery. Okay, so they had to elevate those blocks way, way, way up to get them away from the danger point of penetrating the Grand Gallery. That is one possible explanation. I think that why those chambers are there. I mean, people have postulated other ideas, but these chambers were never meant to be seen. They were never meant to be used. So I think the reason must be perfunctory.
Well, you made an interesting comment, Scott, where you talked about how the Egyptian culture as a whole believed that their world was going to come to a cataclysmic end due to a deluge. And if you kind of follow that narrative back, much further in our past, I mean, every ancient culture on the face of the earth has this story of this worldwide flood that basically resets or reboots humanity. And if you follow certain narratives, we're essentially talking about Atlantis here. And in that story, the refugees from Atlantis, they weren't destroyed, right? They were displaced. And so that's in some theories why we see so many commonalities within the megalithic record in different pockets of the earth, right? Teotihuacan down and then places in Peru, and then you have Göbekli Tepe, and you have the pyramid. We have all these similarities in the megalithic record. Scott, do you think that it's possible that narrative found its way into Egyptian culture because it's something that they had already experienced in their past, and they were just using the past to forecast the future almost?
It's absolutely possible, because if you consider I think it's the Temple of Horus at Dendera, on the walls and the columns, basically everywhere inside that temple, all these hieroglyphic inscriptions which talk about the primeval ones, the primeval time when their forefathers lived on an island, and this island fell beneath the waves, and the survivors left and came to Egypt and refounded the civilization. That story is on the walls of, I believe it's the Temple of Dendera. So yeah, absolutely. When you consider that story, it's so alike with the conventional story of Atlantis that we hear from Plato.
Well, there's also the connection where, when Solon goes to Egypt,
Yeah,
he hears the story of Atlantis from the Egyptian priest, and the Egyptian asks Solon, how long has society, or not society, excuse me, culture, civilization been a thing? And Solon gives him his answer, and the Egyptian priest laughs at him and says, we are far older than that. And that's when he riffs on the story of Atlantis. And then Solon takes that story back, and Plato overhears it essentially, and that's how we have it in the Timaeus and Critias today. But I mean, if for it to be on the walls in Dendera, that's one thing, but then to also get an account of it from Plato in a completely separate, material altogether, it's pretty mind bending to me, right?
yeah,
So
yeah. I mean, my own view is that the Great Pyramid is approximately, it's much older. This was obviously these marks, these painted marks that Vyse allegedly found in these chambers. It basically puts the Great Pyramid in a vice, in a vice, in a
Hey-oh, bam, 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 bam.
ham horn.
in a stranglehold of 4,500 years old. That's what these marks in these chambers do. It locks the Great Pyramid to that time frame. Whereas I believe, from my own other independent research and other theories, that the pyramid is 14,150 years old. It's that old. Now that would have been laughed at, years ago. Just be mocked, ridiculed. But because of Göbekli Tepe, discoveries like that, we're pushing the boundaries of our origins further and further back in time.
I want to get your take on this, Scott. Like, it's no secret that there's this uniformitarian chokehold on history, on our story, and then more specifically on the Giza Plateau, right? Like, hell, we could have like a 2-hour conversation on Zahi Was, I'm sure, and that would be we probably should do that. That'd be interesting as hell. But if you look at some of the work that Shock has done, I believe funded by the Casey Foundation, where they utilize sonar to analyze beneath the left paw of the Sphinx because of the predictions that Edgar Casey made as it relates to the Hall of Records. It's very obvious that there's a chamber down there, but then nobody is allowed to go near the thing. So like, you've been to Giza, you've worked at these sites, to move your research forward. Like, why do you think there is such a chokehold on really uncovering the purpose of these sites?
Well, it's so frustrating. It really is. I have some Egyptologist friends, and I was discussing with them about these quarry marks, and I found all this evidence, an absolute ton of evidence, and I'm still finding even more evidence, guys, that these marks are fake. And this, these Egyptologist friends have said to me, "Yeah, Scott, we kind of know it, but we're just not allowed to say anything." If these guys, these professional Egyptologists, they start to rock the boat, they're out, okay? They're out on their ear. They will not be allowed to do any more research in Giza or in Egypt. They won't be allowed to, they'll get very little grant funding. Their reputation will be trashed. That's the hold that the establishment, if you like, the Egyptological academic establishment has on the whole arena of research into our past. These guys should be the custodians and the guardians of the truth, but they're the custodians and the guardians only of their own truth, what they want to believe, how they interpret the evidence. And I know that they have interpreted the evidence very much wrongly in a number of places, so badly wrongly. And but they are the gatekeepers. They're the ones in charge of who gets to do what. And to me, it's just quite annoying. But fortunately, the internet has blown it all open, because in a lot of ways we can circumvent them. We can circumvent the academia and just go around them and get our ideas out there. We don't care what you guys say. This is what I think. And, if it's a plausible enough and it's interesting enough theory, it gets published by my publishers in their Traditions Bearing Company. And, that's how we get around this. That's how we get around it. We just go around, just do our own thing. Yeah, you guys, you know what? Your theories are, yeah, you're welcome to them. If that's what you want to believe, mainstream, you want to believe that, fine. We don't have a problem with that. But you know what? We think they're wrong in a lot of places. This is why we think they're wrong. And here's the evidence to prove it. We just, put it out there and just contest it. You couldn't do that, before the internet.
Right.
You just couldn't do that, but you can now. And the internet is such a liberating thing. It's a lot of good things, a lot of bad things about it, but generally I think the internet has been a good thing, so it allows us to do this. And I think that's really the only way we're ever going to change things, until what I call the old guard is replaced by new, younger, forward-thinking Egyptologists. That's the only way it will change.
And seeing how, some of the younger archaeological efforts that are happening right now, specifically some of those that are using new technologies, it's been really kind of cool to see in the last few years, specifically since they started using that Scan Pyramids project, the Japanese and French researchers who started using muons to detect that floating chamber above the, it's so cool, and so to think that, on the low end, if we're looking at traditional historical reference for this theory, you're thinking about something in 5,000 years, we haven't discovered this chamber, only through the use of technology were we able to do so. And then thinking about it being, over 10,000 years old, missing it the entire time, like clearly there are still mysteries and answers to be gotten. And one of the things we know, your research is connected with Zakaria Sitchin. Can you explain that connection and some of the things that you guys are doing?
Well, it's I would say it's a tangential connection, because Zechariah was the first person to look at these quarry marks inside these Vyse chambers. He was the first guy to do it, and he basically came to the conclusion that the marks were fake and that Vyse had faked them. Now, the problem was he made some pretty bad mistakes, and because of that, he made some really brilliant observations which are still valid to this day. So get that in right now. And they're still valid, but he made some pretty bad mistakes, which basically allowed the establishment to circle the wagons and to trash what he was saying. But, what he was saying, in my opinion, was correct. His hunch was right, but some of his evidence, he could have done better. Let's put it that way. So that's the connection. I'm basically taking what Zechariah said. I think it was Stairway to Heaven, 1980. That's when he first stated that the marks were fake. So I basically that baton passed on to a chap called Alan Alford. I don't know if you've read any of his work, but he also came to the same conclusion. Unfortunately, both of those guys have passed away. So the baton for this particular research is passed on to myself. But I've spent the last, about 10 years now solidly researching this subject, because we need to nail this. We need to show the world that those marks are fake, because once people realize those marks are fake, then that's the only evidence that Egyptology has to directly connect Khufu to that structure. Sure, there's other marks that have found Khufu and other stones outside the pyramid. That's different. They could have been done any time.
Right.
But marks inside a sealed chamber, that's a different kettle of fish. That's a different story altogether. You know, they see those marks, they must be genuine because they were found in a sealed chamber. Now, we can nail them, we can show, no, they're fake, then it opens up the whole question. It takes the Great Pyramid out of this stranglehold that Egyptology has with this date of 2500 BC. It removes that, just blows it away.
Which is another reason that I think your work is not only so interesting, Scott, but also so important, is because you are poking that bear in real time. And so, you know, you just 100% have to keep going down the rabbit hole and pulling on these threads like you have, my friend. It's fascinating stuff. But before we wrap up today, though, because this conversation's been amazing. We truly appreciate the time. CK and I have a little bit of a challenge for you. That's, I think, a little silly.
Oh man.
So here's how it's going to go. It's a little game that we're going to call the accent challenge. So each one of us is going to say, you're listening to Lost Origins with Scott Crichton. But the twist here is CK and I will each say it in our best Scottish accent. And then Scott, you're going to hit us with your best American accent. And again, we're going to say you're listening to Lost Origins with Scott Crichton. So, I mean,
You know, whenever I start to get an accent, I inevitably digress or progress, depending on how you see things, into Jamaican accent. So this is going to be very difficult for me to keep it straight.
all right. So
Okay, all right.
I will take the lead here. Okay. All right. Listen, Scott. Listen, Lost Origins. This is Scott Crichton. I got this. I got to do my best not to go Irish. So I always go Irish. Here we go. You're listening to Lost Origins, and today we're talking to Scott Crichton. That's pretty okay.
That was
right?
great. That was amazing.
Okay.
You're listening
Sounds like
to.
Mrs. Doubtfire.
I do sound like Mrs. Doubtfire.
Oh,
You're listening to Doubtfire, dear.
You're listening to Lost Origins, and this has been the show with Scott Crichton.
That's good. That was solid. It's kind of weird to have eye contact while you're doing it.
Staring into your soul.
All right, Scott.
Scott, thank you so much for your time today.
Don't let him off the hook, though. He's
You've got to do it. Yeah, sorry.
Best American
hit us with your
accent.
best American accent.
Well, guys, I'm really not sure I can do this, but I'll sure as hell give it a real try.
Let's full rip. Let's go.
Let's get going, dudes.
Nailed it.
You're listening to Lost Origins with Scott Crichton.
Nailed
That's it. That's
So
it.
much
It's
better than us.
perfect.
Yeah.
Like you sound like you're just on the tail
pure
down.
natural. Could just be in California going to surf the waves, bro.
Really not sure I can do this, guys.
So good. But thank you for getting into such depth today and going into so much detail. So excited for the new book.
Yeah, it's awesome stuff. Before we cut you loose, Scott, I mean, two questions here. One, are you working on a follow-up to the Great Pyramid Hoax? And then two, where can people find your work online? Are you on social media? Do you have a website? Just unpack that for us very quickly.
Okay, well, yes, I am working on the Great Pyramid Hoax 2, which will present a lot more evidence of this hoax, but it'll also delve into a bit more about what the Great Pyramid is all about and what the big void that they've recently discovered with this myography technology, what that is, why it's there, and what to find inside it. You can find my books in a bookstore, guys, any bookstore. Get down to the bookstores, support your local bookstores. Yeah, we don't want to lose these bookstores. We're losing too many of them. Alternatively, you can get the books online at innertraditions.com. Just go on to their website and just search for Scott Crichton, and you can get it also at all the other usual online bookstore outlets.
Yeah, and we'll include a link to your books through Inner Traditions in the show notes for today's show. But Scott, my friend, as always, it's always a pleasure talking to you. I've always enjoyed our conversations. I'm thrilled that we were able to get you connected with CK. We definitely are going to have you back on the show in the future. So just huge thank you from CK and myself for making time for us today.
Thank you so much, Scott.
Yeah, thanks, guys. It's been an honor and a privilege and an absolute blast.
Same.
You have
Cheers.
a great one. Take it easy, Scott.
You too. Take
Bye.
care now. Bye bye.
Well, hot damn, dude. What'd you think?
Man, oh man, what a genuinely just gregarious person.
Right.
He's just so fun.
He is. I mean, accent aside.
Accent aside,
Right.
which is incredible.
Yes.
He is just so thoughtful in the space, and he has a way about saying things that are particularly controversial without condescension. I feel like he really helped walk us through, and I hope the listeners feel the same way, without really putting too much of a stake in the ground, saying absolutely these are fake, no question these are 100% fake, as much as saying, hey, you know what, my research really indicates that these cartouches were not genuine,
Right.
and here are the potential implications there. And it was really fascinating to hear about Vyse as a person, as a figure. I was not as initiated with understanding who he was. But
Right. I mean,
what an
that
interesting
dude,
situation.
there is a lot of controversy around that guy. And Scott also does a really good job of like setting you up to go consume his book.
Yep.
And so he does unpack Vice in greater detail in his book. And he also gets into the nitty gritty on a much deeper level as far as like what's in the pyramids and the all the evidence that indicates that these markings were in fact fabricated by Vice and company. And so for those out there who have not read it, I highly encourage you to hop over to innertraditions.com, pick up a copy of that thing. I looked this morning. I want to say it's even like on sale today. So if you're lucky enough that thing is still going on, yeah, I mean, you get a book and a cup of coffee, right? That's not, or a beer,
And
or
you don't even need to have Paul Klopping hit you on Patreon for that.
you brought it full
You just
circle.
do that yourself.
God, I love it, man. I love it when there's closure, and it's a beautiful thing.
But really, what a like great way to spend an hour with somebody who's clearly just on fire with new information, new research. And it was cool right at the end there to hear him saying, that they're with the scanned pyramid study and the muography that they're doing, that he's already working on a new book to dig deeper into the new stuff that's happened after they scanned that chamber in 2015. So
Right.
it's so cool that there's just longer term continuity, and he's just one of those resources that's just going to keep pushing the ball up the field.
Well, and I think it's a lot of it is because like every corner you turn in the mystery that is ancient Egypt, like you encounter a matrice of additional mysteries, right? It's just like this weird network of what the hell actually happened here. And I love the way he's approaching it. And it's so systematic and methodical. And I love that he's in a position with his career that he has the flexibility to go dig into this stuff and just hit the world with what he's digging up and finding, and he's thorough too, right? Like when he talked about figuring out how to track down Vice's personal journal in a library in I think South London, like
Becoming in North
North
London,
London, yeah.
becoming like a handwriting expert
Right.
over the course of years, just to like be an expert in this guy's scratchings. Yeah, it's pretty thorough.
Yeah, I dig it. I really do. So I hope everybody out there enjoyed the conversation as much as I know we did. If you did enjoy the conversation and you feel compelled to just support the homies, hit that subscribe button. Leave us a review on whatever podcast platform that you're accessing the show from. Check out our Patreon account. Like we have several tiers built out, and there's things that you get based on what tier you subscribe to. But I mean, $3 helps, right? Like it helps us get better reach with the show. It helps us do different things and upgrade our equipment and just like make this thing as pro as we possibly can. And so it does go a long way. And so for those of you who do support the show, we humbly and graciously thank you.
And if you don't necessarily have the wherewithal or the moment to support the show financially, feel free to submit social content to us with your best Scottish accents or American accents, or get us some questions for future guests. Help us dig into this stuff. Your participation in the community is at least as important to us as any of that other support. So we look forward to all of that stuff. And, real human beings, we have no robots doing this stuff. Real
Hmm.
human beings are going to answer all of those things. They're going to be seeing it. So it's definitely the easiest way to have a direct influence over the future of the podcast on your as a listener.
Well, and we take it serious, right? I
Yeah.
think that's the
Yeah.
biggest thing is, when we published on social media, I think it was like maybe 2 months ago that we were trying to just block out the schedule for these conversations. Who do you as the listeners want us to bring on the show? We got a ton of feedback, and we've reached out to every single person that was requested.
Mhm.
And as of right now, I mean, our calendar is booked for the next 3 months, I think,
Yeah.
for conversation. And there's some conversations in there that I cannot wait to have. I mean, it's going to be one hell of a ride. So keep that coming, you guys. We want to know who you want us to talk to, because we want to be creating content that you're excited about and that you want to consume and dig into. So
And we appreciate you spending an hour with us, digging in on these different aspects of we call them mysteries, but just the human condition. So
mhm.
thank you for spending your time with us.
100%. So next week we have another veteran coming back on the show. David Matheson is he does a lot of work in like ancient star myths all across the globe, and then like the connections from one culture to another, and the implications that they have for like transoceanic contact and travel. Way back in history, when cultures were not supposed to be able to make that happen and have that kind of contact. He has 3 or 4 books out. um, I have 2 or 3 of them. All the books are still boxed up downstairs after the move, but his books are tomes, dude. Like 1,000-page
Oh my
plus,
gosh.
so many diagrams and photos, and just all of this really, really compelling stuff that just reinforces, what mystery or thread he's pulling at. And they are such solid reads. They're really fun rabbit holes to jump down. And the guy is just really, really solid in terms of like how he communicates and explains some of these theories, because some of them are pretty complex, but he does a really good job of making it like easy to understand and accessible. And so I'm excited to have him back on the show. I'm excited for the listeners to digest that content, but more so, I'm excited for you
Sure.
to have the opportunity to ask him some of the questions, because you know, I know you, and I
I
know
like
where,
stars.
yeah, I know where your brain's gonna go, and I feel like you're gonna usurp some stuff out of David that's gonna be real next level. It's gonna be
Awesome.
cool.
Look so forward to it.
Yeah, it'll be good stuff. So next week with David Matheson, make sure you guys tune in for that. Until then, I'm Andrew,
I'm CK.
and we challenge you to question everything.